A lot of things happened when COVID struck. New York State made some decisions that caused a lot of people to think about whether or not these were actually the right things to do, not from a medical standpoint, but from a government standpoint. We're going to learn a lot about that on this week's episode of the State of Greater Western New York Report, which, of course, is brought to you, as always, by...
Each week, our community makes history. Each week, you make history. And each week, there's only one source to turn to for the first take on history. You know what that is? Subscribe to the Sentinel right now to discover the history being made in your own backyard. The Linden Honeylake Falls Lima Sentinel. More than just your news, it's your history. Welcome, everyone, to this edition of the State of Greater Western New York Report. Join us each episode as we discuss fantastic topics ranging from history to science to the strange and the wonderful, as well as the treasured spirit with which our region has infused America. We challenge you to consider all things Greater Western New York, from our region's very beginnings to how it inspires, how it empowers, and why it is so admired. Here's the host of the State of Greater Western New York Report, Chris Carosa.
Hey, welcome everybody to this week's edition of the State of Greater Western New York Report. With us this week is a very special guest. It's Bonnie Anne Flower Cox, and she is an attorney who is actually taking a case to New York State or against New York State. But before we get into that, let's just talk to Bobbie about what Bobbie is and what Bobbie does. Bobbie, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got to where you are right now.
Okay, great. Hi, Chris. Thanks for having me on. So I'm an attorney here in New York. I've been practicing law for about 25 years now. And before this, I was a property tax certiorari special attorney. So what I did basically was represented property owners against the government when they were being improperly overly assessed and taxed by the government. So then COVID came along, and as you know, New York State, the government in New York State got a little crazy and had a lot of COVID restrictions and a lot of tyrannical COVID restrictions. We saw a lot of overstep by the executive branch in New York State in particular. We're seeing it at the federal level as well. But so I decided that I needed to do something because I couldn't really watch what was going on in good conscience. And this regulation that I am now challenging is pretty horrific. It really not only violates the New York State and the federal Constitution, but it really, in my mind, is just the epitome of tyranny.
So did your experience with the property, taking on the government and the property, it sort of primed you for this case that you're in the middle of right now, with regards to the rules pertaining to COVID. What was the most important thing about your previous role in terms of the property questions that's helping you right now with this case?
Well, I really have for 2 decades been suing the government. I've been doing it at the local level, so municipalities, towns, cities, villages, and such, school districts, that kind of a thing. So this case is similar in that now I'm still suing the government, but now I'm suing the state government. So I'm suing the governor, her Department of Health, the head of the Department of Health, and the Health Planning Council. So it's similar. It's just a different level of government that I'm dealing with.
So tell us more about what led up to this case. What were the rules? What were the regulations that came about? And what really was it about those rules that prompted the citizens to really start questioning what the government was doing and asking somebody like you to get involved?
Right. So basically, the name of the regulation is called Isolation and Quarantine Procedures, and it's found at 10 NYCRR 2.13. And basically what this regulation says, it's in effect, it's not, a proposed regulation that they're thinking about maybe doing. This has actually been implemented. They've been promulgating this. Hochul's administration has been promulgating this since August of 2021 when she first took office. And what this allows them to do, this regulation, is the Department of Health can pick and choose which New Yorkers they can force into isolation or quarantine. So that could be in your home. They could lock you down in your home, or they can remove you from your home and force you to go into a detention facility or a facility, a camp, whatever you want to call it. They get to pick where you go. They also get to pick how long you're locked down or locked up. And they don't have to prove you actually have a communicable disease. They just need to think that maybe you might have been exposed to a communicable disease. There's no age restriction. So they could do this to you. They could do this to your child. They could do this to your grandchild. They could do this to your elderly parent or grandparent. So there are really no restrictions. There are no protections in this regulation. And the power is unbridled. The power they gave it to themselves. There was no authorization from the New York State Legislature for them to make this regulation. Now, of course, the Attorney General, who is representing the state, is arguing they did have authority through the public health law, Section 225, but that is completely untrue. The New York State Legislature does not want New Yorkers to be forcibly locked down or locked up because they might possibly have been exposed to a communicable disease. That is clear because there was a proposed law for several years and it never passed. It not only never passed, Chris, it never went to a vote. It never even got out of the agency, the committee where it was proposed, which was the Public Health Committee, the Health Committee within the New York State Assembly. So it never got out of committee. It never was put on an agenda. It never went up for a vote. It had no support at all. And the author of that proposed bill actually withdrew it in December of 2021 because he was getting such backlash when people finally caught wind about this proposed legislation. So he withdrew it, which is very rare. That is not common. So we already know that the New York State Legislature does not want to forcibly lock up or lock down New Yorkers that may or may not have a communicable disease.
So now you're going to have to educate me on this because I might have fallen asleep during class in school when they talked about this. But rounding up people and putting them in some place, that doesn't sound like what the Constitution says we're allowed to do. I understand this is a federal constitution. Maybe the state is different. Can you kind of explain how this theoretically happens?
Right, of course. So our New York State Constitution is very similar to our federal Constitution. And this lawsuit that I'm bringing is based on the New York State Constitution. It's similar, though. We have separation of powers, right? We're supposed to have 3 branches of government: the legislative branch, the judicial branch, and the executive branch. And each one of those branches is supposed to have its own powers and authorities. And what happens is the legislative branch is supposed to make law. The executive branch is supposed to enforce the laws that are made by the legislature. And then you have the judicial branch, which is the judges and the courts. So what we saw here was the executive branch took the power of the legislative branch, right? Now they've made a law. They haven't made a regulation. They're calling it a regulation, but it's not really a regulation. It's a law. And so they took the power from the legislature and they made this law. And so the whole premise of our lawsuit is, I'm representing a citizens group called Uniting New York State, but I'm also representing a group of New York State legislators. It's Senator George Borrello, it's Assemblyman Chris Tague, and it's Assemblyman Mike Lawler. And so the whole argument is the usurpation of their legislative power, because the executive branch overstepped. They went into lawmaking. They took the power from the lawmakers, which is the legislative branch, and they made an impermissible law. So it's a separation of powers argument in this lawsuit, but it's also, as you alluded to, complete violation of constitutional rights that New Yorkers have, that Americans have in general, that you are not allowed to have unreasonable searches and seizures of yourself, your body, your person, your property. You certainly are allowed to have and have a right to have due process. And this regulation has no due process provisions. There are no protections in this regulation for you and me. It is just complete power.
The thing that strikes me about this is, and again, I'm just a regular person when it comes to this. I'm not a lawyer. I don't know anything about constitutional law, but I'm harking back to what we learned in school, elementary school, going that far back. It just seems like such an obvious violation. How long did it take you to actually go from when this rule was promulgated to the point of actually suing them? Was there a delay at all, or was it pretty much immediate?
Well, so this regulation actually started under Governor Cuomo back in March of 2020. He was the first, or his Department of Health was the first agency to issue this regulation. And Hochul is just continuing the same exact regulation that started under Cuomo. The difference is that Cuomo in March of 2020 was given special powers by the New York State Legislature. They amended Section 29-A of the executive law in March of 2020 to give Cuomo special emergency powers to deal with the pandemic, because it was new. Nobody knew what it was. People were scared. The media was making a big hype about it. So they did give him these special powers. However, 1 year later, in March of 2021, they took those powers back from him. They changed the executive law 29A and made it back to the way it was before. So they took away his power to make these directives, or these mandates, as everybody was calling them. And so when he lost that special power, so did his Department of Health, right? So, because he had passed that power on to his Department of Health when he first got the emergency power. So he lost his emergency power. His Department of Health lost that emergency power. And Hochul never got that emergency power from the New York State Legislature. So she absolutely never had power to do any sort of a directive or mandate like this. And neither does her Department of Health, because they don't have the power from her through executive order, and they don't have the power from the legislature through statute. And agencies can only do what they're allowed to do through the power given to them from the legislature. So if there's a law that's passed by the legislature that says, hey, we want to forcibly lock down New Yorkers that we think may or may not have a communicable disease, and then they want the agency to go ahead and make rules and regulations to help implement that law, then that's okay. Now, I'm not saying that the law would be constitutional. I'm just saying from procedural standpoint, that's how it would have to work. But an agency cannot just by itself come up with a rule or a regulation that it wants to make and put into effect. It has to have the authority given to it from the legislature through statute.
This is very interesting, Bobbie, and you're bringing up two things really that are important for people to realize. One is there's procedure, and over and above that, there's just constitutional rights. So at this point, it sounds like the case you're making, and we'll get into this after the break, is primarily focused on procedure, because that would seem to be step one. And if they ever did follow the procedure for this, it might entail another case on constitutional rights. But there's also a bunch of questions that people have that I'll transfer over. They're just kind of curious. They have the same sort of school level education on this that I do. So we'll give you a chance to answer that in a moment, Bobbie. But first, let's go to our commercial break.
Through the mists of time, nature and man have both created and buried treasures beyond the imagination. With the ages, these riches slowly dissolve into mere myths until they are forever forgotten. But there are those brave souls who tirelessly cling to the truth, ever seeking to discover the undiscovered, to reveal what has always been there, to uncover the hidden gems of a land thought forsaken but loved by millions. 50 Hidden Gems of Greater Western New York. Discover the secrets in your own backyard. Buy your copy now at 50hiddengems.com.
Okay, so welcome back, everyone, to the State of Greater Western New York report. With us today is Bonnie Anne Flower Cox, who's an attorney representing a number of groups and individuals and people, and also elected representatives, fighting against what New York State has put down in terms of these regulations. And actually, Bonnie Anne, we did have a question from somebody. I know you've already said this, but it's more of a clarification. Can you explain exactly who's on what side of this? Who's the plaintiff? Who's the defendant? And maybe tell us a little bit more about United NYS.
Yes, absolutely, Chris. So I'm representing, they're called, it's an Article 70 proceeding. So they're actually called petitioners instead of plaintiffs. So the petitioners that I'm representing is Uniting New York State, which is a citizens group. And then I'm representing a group of New York State legislators. That's Senator George Borrello, Assemblyman Chris Teague, and Assemblyman Mike Lawler. And we are suing the governor, which is Kathy Hochul, the commissioner of health, which is Mary Bassett, and then the Department of Health and the Health Planning Council. So we also have a group of New York State legislators who wrote an amicus brief. For anyone that's not sure what that is, it's a brief that's written by a party that is not actually a part of the lawsuit. So they're not a petitioner and they're not a respondent, but they're outside the lawsuit, but they have a keen interest on the outcome of the lawsuit. So they file an amicus brief, it's called, which is a legal document, and it basically supports one side or the other. It says to the judge, hey, this is why I think, or this is why we think that this side should win and that side should lose. And so it's a group of New York State assemblymen, Assemblyman Andy Goodell, Assemblyman Joe Giglio, and Assemblyman Will Barkley got together and did this amicus brief in support of our case. Now, the Attorney General, who's representing the governor and the Department of Health, of course, fought against the amicus brief. They tried to keep it out of court. They didn't want the judge to be able to read it and consider it. So we had to do motion practice back and forth and ask the judge to please let him consider the amicus brief. And we ultimately won that motion. So the judge did allow the amicus brief to be allowed to be read and considered in the case, which is great because the brief is terrific. It just helps bolster our argument that, hey, the Department of Health and the governor, they're out of line here. They stepped over the line. They came into the world of lawmaking where they don't belong, and they need to be put back into their lane of law enforcement, not lawmaking.
This particular case that you're doing, actually, I'm judging it from what I'm seeing on the chat here. It seems very interesting. People are very interested in it. It's got a lot of similarities to what people have been questioning about what's coming from Albany in general, not just about this in specific, but it's just the idea that Albany is forcing issues down on areas that really they don't apply. It's the old one size fits all, really doesn't sort of idea. And that seems to be appealing to people. In fact, somebody asked here, one person said, how can I see what's going on or keep up to date on this case? And the other person asked, is there a way I can get involved? Now, I don't know exactly about, well, I won't answer the question for you. I'll let you answer the question and see what people could do.
Sure, sure. So to follow the case, the citizens group Uniting NYS, they actually created a web page specifically for this lawsuit. So people can go to the web page. You can sign up for weekly newsletters that you'll get, which will update you on what's going on in the case. And that's www.unitingnys.com/lawsuit. People can go there. You can read, there's a link there to the regulation itself, so you can read the regulation yourself. There are photos from a press conference that we had in Albany a couple months ago when we first started the lawsuit. There's a video of that press conference with the senator and the assemblyman on the case. We have a short 2-minute commercial video on that page that people can watch, which explains the regulation and then talks about our lawsuit. And there's also a list of things people can do if they want to volunteer and get involved. If you sign up for the weekly newsletters with Uniting New York State, you're automatically put onto their list, their member list. And so you would actually technically be a part of the lawsuit. But there are ways to get involved. We really can use help sharing and spreading the word. A lot of people don't know about this regulation. Believe it or not, it's being kept very quiet and being swept under the rug. And people don't know about our lawsuit, that we're trying to fight this and stop it. So by just sharing the information on our webpage, sharing the link to this interview, sharing the link to that webpage, maybe passing, we have flyers on there about the lawsuit. You can download the flyers and post them on your social media. People can email the flyers to other people. You can email the link to our video, our 2-minute commercial that's on there. So there's a lot of ways that people can help in spreading the word. And that's the biggest thing we need to do right now, is educate more of New York about this regulation and about the lawsuit. There's a donate button there. I'm doing the case pro bono, so if people are inclined to donate, that would be terrific. And there are just a lot of things people can do to try and help spread the word. And if you go to the webpage, there's also a timeline there listed, so you can see when the lawsuit started and then the steps that we've taken and then where we are right now.
I have a question there's another question that I got to ask from the audience, but before I get to that, I have a question. I'm kind of curious. This does seem like a pretty significant news story. How have you been able to get the word out, or have you gone to major media outlets? What have they responded when you went to them?
So I've been doing a lot of interviews on local radio stations and podcasts, internet shows. Nothing on mainstream media thus far. I don't think that mainstream media wants to cover this story because I think that it's against their interest, right? So if we have people in your audience that have connections to mainstream media, it would be terrific if you want to reach out to your contacts and see if they are interested in this story. But yeah, I mean, I would think that, Newsmax or OAN, some of the Fox News stations, I would think they would want to pick this up, because this lawsuit is really not just about New Yorkers. The case is about New York and this New York reg and the overstepping of the New York governor and the Department of Health. That's true. But if you think about it, it has much wider implications. If we don't win this case, if we don't ultimately strike down this regulation, it is going to send a signal to not just New York agencies, but agencies in states across the country that, hey, you can make a regulation or a rule that conflicts with the Constitution or conflicts with existing New York state law. And don't worry, nothing's going to happen to you. You can just do whatever you want. It's going to become a free-for-all. You're going to see agencies in states across the nation trying to implement this type of a regulation where they get complete control over their citizens. This regulation, I want to point out, Chris, this regulation doesn't have any provision that it has to be a time of emergency that they use this regulation. So they could just, anytime they want, knock on your door and say, oh, we have an order here from the Commissioner of Health, and you need to either lock down in your house or you need to come with us. You need to go to this quarantine facility.
Every time you say something like that, I have images of the British pre-Revolutionary War. Don't ask me why. Okay, a couple more questions here and only a few more minutes left. So where are we right now in the case? When can we expect a verdict or whatever it is that you might call it in this kind of case?
Right. So we had oral arguments in front of the judge last week. And so the judge is going to be writing a decision. He did not say the time frame in which he would release that decision, but we're hoping it's sooner than later. So yeah, that's where we are right now. We are waiting on the judge's decision. We did have about 2 months worth of motion practice back and forth. First, the Attorney General removed us to federal court, trying to claim it was a federal case with federal law, and it was just a big stall tactic. We got back into state court. We had to fight and do motion practice and have oral arguments in front of the federal judge, but we got back into state court. Then they opposed the amicus brief. They tried to keep it out of court. We had to do motion practice there. We won that. The judge allowed the amicus brief. So there's been a lot of back and forth, but now we are at the point where we're waiting for the judge's decision.
So you mentioned the state trying to push this into federal court, and now it's making me thinking, if you're not satisfied with the ruling of the judge, can you go to the United States Supreme Court, or because this being a state issue, it can't go to the Supreme Court?
Right. So the way that it works in New York State is you start at the trial level, which is the New York State Supreme Court. I know it sounds wrong, but the lowest level of court in New York State is called Supreme Court. And that's where we are right now. If we don't like the decision of the judge, or if the Attorney General doesn't like the decision of the judge, the next level would be going to what's called the appellate division. And then if you don't like the decision of the appellate division, then you can appeal one more time to the highest court in New York State, which is called the Court of Appeals, which sits in Albany. So it's a process, and there are steps along the way. If we win, I assume that the Attorney General is going to appeal because they don't want to give up the power is what I'm thinking. There in front of the judge last week when we had oral arguments, the Attorney General's office made it very clear that they are defending this regulation because they believe that they need ultimate power over New Yorkers to be able to control us 100% no matter what. It doesn't matter if it's an emergency or not. It doesn't matter if we're in a declared state of disaster or anything like that. They just want to have the power on a statewide level to be able to control the people, pick which ones they want to control, who's going to be locked down in their house, who's going to get thrown into a facility or a camp or whatever you want to call it. They get to decide how long you stay there, no age restrictions, no time limits, and they don't even have to prove that you're sick. There is New York state law that already is on the books that talks about what you have to do if you want to remove someone from society who's a health threat. This regulation conflicts with that law 100%.
Like I say, it's just bringing up bad memories from history class. Bobbie Anne, thank you very much for this very informative show that you've been able to share your knowledge with us. I want to say, go to that website. I'm going to put it up one more time very quickly here. If you want to learn more, www.unitingnys.com /lawsuit or / I can never get them straight. If you want to learn more about this, I will also say if you want to ask questions of our guests, you can do it just like you saw today by being part of the live audience each week, every Thursday at noon. We send you this show and you get to participate if you like. Just go to this website here and sign up to be a member, and it's free, and you get invited, and it's free. Everything is free. It just gets you that information so you can be on the live audience. If you don't make the live audience, then you can always just watch us on the archive on stateof.greaterwesternnewyork.com, or if you are on Facebook, like our page, Greater Western New York, and you will be notified when the show re-airs every Sunday at 1:30. If you are on YouTube, subscribe to our channel, Greater Western New York, and you will be notified by YouTube when the show re-airs at 1:30 every Sunday. With that, again, Bobbie Anne, thank you very much. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see everybody again next week. Same bat time, same bat channel.